All right, we have Garrett Reisman with us today.
Reisman.
And Reisman.
Don't
All
feel
right,
bad.
let's
Keep
do that
recording.
again.
Don't feel bad. Everybody gets that wrong. It's I think my grandfather did his best to pronounce his name when he came through Ellis Island, and they did their best to write it down. And it probably should be spelled Ree or something differently. But yeah, Stephen Colbert got it wrong too. So you're in good company. Okay. But yeah, it's Reisman.
Okay.
That's
All
fine.
right. We'll just keep that in there.
Yep.
Reisman.
Okay, Ozan. I'll try to mess up yours. Oh, see, now I
That's
can
all
now,
right.
now I
I've
have
been
it.
called all kinds of things.
Right, okay. All right, go ahead. Keep going. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, please. So, Garrett Reisman.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who don't know, Garrett Reisman, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of the details here, you are a mechanical engineering PhD. You're a NASA astronaut. You went to space twice, helped assemble the International Space Station. And then after you retired from NASA, you went to work for SpaceX for 7 years on their human spaceflight program, right? And you became the director of crew operations. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, director of space. Well, first crew operations, and
Director of
then
space.
we
Okay.
merged with all the mission control folks, and I became the director, or the department became the space operations, to encompass both the in the vehicle and the ground operations as well.
All right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you left SpaceX,
Mhm.
and you are working right now as a professor at USC.
That's right. Go Trojans, fight on! Woo! Yeah, whatnot. Yes,
All
correct.
right.
Yes.
And at the same time, you are a technical consultant for All Mankind.
That's
right?
right. Mm-hmm.
And you're doing the Two Funny Astronauts podcast with Mike Massimino.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yep. That's all
Wow.
true. Yeah. So yeah, we're currently figuring out what we're going to do with that podcast, but it's all the episodes we've recorded so far are still available, and you can get them on YouTube if you want to see our. We got faces that are better suited for audio only. So you might want to just listen on
I can relate.
like Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of those. We're on all of them, and but you can see us on YouTube if you want to do that. So
All right. Yeah, I'll add the links into the video description.
cool. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
And as
Yeah,
you'll
you
find
guys
out
are
since
really
you're starting
funny.
your
You
own
say you're
podcast,
just-
what's more important
Yeah.
for people, rather than what's more important than listening, is just logging on and liking and subscribing. Right? Just click on those two things. You don't have to listen. Just go there and click on those, and we're happy. That's all we're asking for. Okay? So that should do it.
All right. So you have had a number of dream careers. I feel like I could ask you a million questions about each of them. But I specifically asked you to talk to me about the future of human space flight. So I'm going to try to stick to that, but we'll go where we go. To start us off, so about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, you did an interview with Joe Rogan. And it's a great interview, by the way. Controversy around Joe Rogan aside, for those who are willing to look past that and go watch it. It's a fantastic 2-hour interview where you ended up sharing a lot of really interesting stories. And he did ask good
Yeah, and
questions.
I'm happy to say there's nothing in there that I'm ashamed of. That our episode is not one of the ones that has been taken down. We didn't do anything wrong when I was there.
That's
So
good.
yeah, but you can go ahead and listen to that one pretty safely, I'd say.
Good. So on there, if I remember correctly, you mentioned that we would be looking back on the year 2020 as the year that things changed for human spaceflight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that might be one piece of misinformation or disinformation in my Joe Rogan podcast episode. I thought 2020 was going to be a year that changed everything because it's going to be the year that that space tourism and private spaceflight was going to happen, and it still might be looked back and if you take the really long view.
Yeah.
It still might be remembered for that, but I think 2020 will be remembered for something else, which I did not see coming at the time. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, crystal ball, right?
Yeah.
It's only reliable to an extent. So delays happened a little bit. Pandemic happened, delays happened. A lot of things got affected. How would you evaluate the last 2 years in terms of how things have moved? Was it what you were expecting, if maybe a bit slower?
Given the curveball that COVID threw us, I think it's actually remarkable
Yeah.
that we stayed on track. And it was for me anyway, the advances we made in human spaceflight during the pandemic was kind of, I wouldn't say a silver lining, but more like a real escape from the all the depressing stuff that I was reading in the news, about the pandemic, about politics, about everything. It seemed like everything was going in the wrong direction, but spaceflight was going in the right direction during that time. And
Yeah.
in 2020, in May of 2020, we launched the first people, Bob and Doug, in our Crew Dragon.
Right.
And I was there. I was able to get there in the middle of the pandemic. I was still able to get down there to the Cape and be there for the launch. And man, that felt great. And
That's awesome.
really, for a moment there, I talked about this when I was doing commentary for that launch, how it kind of reminded me of 1968 to a certain degree, where we were going through a very difficult time. You remember in May of 2020, that's also when we had the George Floyd
That's right.
killing and a lot of the racial tensions that were going on, and in addition to the pandemic and everything else that was happening, so in our society was so divided. And thinking back to 1968, when we were going through some similar stuff in this country,
Sure.
and yet Apollo 8 went around the moon, and a lot of people, for a moment anyway, put all the troubles behind them and looked up and saw this amazing thing in space. And for me, sitting there watching Bob and Doug launch on Falcon 9 and Dragon, it was, again, a very welcome respite from what was otherwise very tumultuous and very depressing period of time.
That makes sense. I mean, it has been a silver lining in all of this that, or maybe not silver lining, but it's something hopeful, bright to look at. How do you see it going forward from here?
Well, it's just a start. And one thing I didn't see that has been interesting to watch, and I probably should have anticipated a little bit more, was the backlash against the fact that this is for the most part, a bunch of rich guys, going into space and
Yeah.
it's been characterized as the billionaire space race, with Bezos and Branson and Elon, although Elon hasn't gone himself, and that's unfortunate. I think it was inevitable because
Sure.
in the beginning it's going to be very expensive. I mean, rockets cost a lot of money,
Right.
and there's no way around that. But to put it in perspective, in the beginning it was very expensive to fly on commercial airliners. In the very beginning of the airlines, the people that were flying in these rickety old airplanes, instead of driving, were millionaires and movie stars. It was like Clark Gable, and they would dress in black tie to go on these Ford Tri-Motors and fly from like Burbank to Vegas. It was like a big thing.
Right.
And it was certainly out of the reach of the common citizen, financially. But now, we've evolved, and it's gotten, the prices have come down, and now pretty much almost anybody who wants to travel by air can travel. And we got Spirit and Frontier. If you're that brave, you can hop on one of those airlines and fly, for a very affordable price. And
At least
that's
in this
going to happen
country.
eventually in space. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah. How long do you think it'll take?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think a lot of it depends on the technology and the economics of the market, and those things are notoriously hard to predict. But I think that the biggest piece of that will be what happens with Starship, really, because Starship promises two things that could potentially have a massive impact on the economics of space tourism or private spaceflight. And one is the scale. We could take 100 people instead of 4. So the scale is immense and mind-boggling, really. And then the other thing about it is that if it achieves the holy grail of 100% reusability, and if that works out, and it's economically, if it's affordable reusability, to the extent that we've seen with Falcon 9, that you really could achieve what Elon was hoping to do, which was achieve aircraft-like operations where you fly, you land right on the same launch pad that you just took off from, fill it up with gas, and you go again as quickly as you turn around a Southwest 737 at the gate of LAX.
Yeah.
If you can do that, that will drastically reduce the cost of a ticket, but that has yet to be demonstrated.
Sure.
So we'll see. But I think the next couple of years are critical, and the success of Starship is critical to really getting that price to drop more rapidly than it would otherwise.
Do you think, how feasible do you think it is technically? There are all kinds of other factors, but
The Starship?
yeah, the full and
general?
rapid reuse.
It's hard. I mean, there's no question that what they're trying to accomplish there is very difficult. But on the other hand, the company has gotten so much more capability and so much more experience since the early days of Falcon 1 and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I think there's some key critical technologies. One is one of the biggest ones for interplanetary missions or even cislunar missions with Starship is being able to pump propellants and refuel in space, and that's something that has not been demonstrated on a large scale, and certainly not to the scale that Starship would need. So that's a low TRL, low a technology that hasn't really been fully developed, and so that's a big question mark.
Okay.
The other thing is being able to land precisely in recovery with the Mechazilla, whatever we're calling that thing, with the big arms on a launch tower. Getting that to work reliably is another key technology, key enabling technology. But then just the scaling up of such a monstrous rocket, the super heavy booster with all of its Raptors and Starship itself is quite a jump forward in scale, and making it all work is also non-trivial. So we'll see. My fingers are crossed. I really hope it. It'll be fantastic to watch that thing fly. So I can't wait till they give it a shot.
Well, me too. Me too. So going through one of those concerns one at a time, just the cryogenic refueling. Now, as a layman with a little bit of understanding of some of the mechanics, it seems like, okay, we've never done it before, but it seems like it's not there shouldn't be too many complicating factors, right? I mean, you as long as you got the ullage and they've got a plan for that, you dock, you connect the fuel lines, and then you pressurize one tank, fuel flows from that into the other. What are the big technical hurdles?
Right. So
from an engineer's
pumping
perspective?
liquids, whether that be through a mechanical pump or through controlling the ullage pressure difference, is a very difficult thing to do in microgravity because it's hard to separate the gaseous and liquid phases. Sure. So any tank, as it empties out, you have to replace it with something. And usually you use, like for Falcon 9, we use an inert gas. And, for shuttle, we used some of the cryo gases that were bleeding off the turbo pumps, or that we actually fed those back up into the tanks and replenished the ullage pressure that way. So there's a bunch of different strategies. But the danger is once your engines are no longer firing, then you might have seen this. We have early on, I don't think we show this on the webcast anymore, but early on for Falcon 9, after SECO, the second engine cutoff, we would show, or even after MECO, the main engine cutoff, in the first stage tank, we would have cameras in there, and you could see how all the fuel just becomes like a lava lamp. It all just,
the fluid,
surface tension makes blobs of the stuff, but it gets all mixed with so now you got a mixture of gas and liquid, and so that's hard. It's hard to pump.
It's not where you want it to be.
A mixture of gas and liquid without any gravity to help you separate the two. So typically, what we do in those cases is we use a settling burn. So we light up the engines or use the thrusters, cold gas thrusters sometimes, or hydrazine thrusters to give some acceleration to make the liquid and the air separate by creating essentially artificial gravity and separating it that way. So that is a strategy, but but it's tricky to do that with something as big as Starship, and so I'm not sure exactly. I'm not privy to exactly what the designs are for that pumping operation, but I can tell you that just from the pure physics of it, it's not simple because of the difficulty in separating the two phases. And if you ingest, the gas into either the pump or one tank or the other, then you can end up with a pump. You can end up with cavitation and overspeeds, and the pump could come apart. So there's a lot. There's a lot. If you don't effectively separate the two phases, this can get ugly.
That makes sense. I understand that the current plan, and I know it's in flux, is either I think it's been at times side to side or tail to tail docking with a sustained micro G burn to settle the fluids, and then do the transfer over some amount of time. So that seemed like, to me, that seemed like, okay, it seems like they have a solution, but you're saying it's going to be more complicated than that.
The same as you can either use linear or rotational acceleration to settle the fluids, but then but even that doesn't necessarily solve your problem. You might need baffles. The slosh dynamics as you're trying to spin something that big might cause it difficult to control if you're doing especially any kind of rotation. So it's not as straightforward. It's like, oh yeah, okay. In Kerbal, it'll work great, fine. And my son would be like, oh, I could do it in Kerbal. How hard can it be? In the real world, it's hard when you do this stuff. So, and that's what makes SpaceX so great, is that they're not afraid to take on something that difficult. And if they run into problems, they'll find them quickly, and then they're good at just putting their heads down and charging through those problems and finding a way to make it work. So, I'm optimistic, but we'll see.
You're optimistic. That's good. Would you fly on
not
Starship?
on the very first one, not after watching all those failed attempts at landing. But eventually, obviously, once it's up and the development test phase is over and it's operational, then I would be happy to. Yeah, I think it'll be a really amazing vehicle once it's fully working.
Yep. So it got selected for the human landing system for Artemis. Were you surprised?
I was
by that
surprised. I was not surprised at the selection. I was surprised that they down selected to one. And I know that NASA would have liked to have had the budget to select more than one provider. NASA has learned the value in that. I mean, just look at what's happening with Commercial Crew. It's interesting. And back in the day before they awarded Commercial Crew, when we were competing at SpaceX with Boeing, with Starliner, and with Sierra Nevada, with Dream Chaser, and with and there are other entrants too. We thought for sure if they down selected to one, it was going to go all to Boeing, and there was a lot of pressure, or a lot of people inside NASA that thought that was the way to go. That we have, funding is finite, and the fastest way we can get rid of our dependency on the Soyuz and have domestic capability to launch men and women into space again was to give all the money we have to Boeing. They're the sure thing. Give it to them, and we were really worried that we were going to be cut out completely,
right?
At SpaceX, and that Crew Dragon was not going to be a thing. It turned out not to be the case, although I think it could have easily gone the other way. And now, in retrospect, wow, what a great idea that was, right? Way to go, NASA. That was brilliant to keep two providers, because now we are regularly doing crew rotations on ISS with Dragon. No matter what happens in Ukraine, we have a guaranteed way to get our men and women up to space, which we didn't have before May of 2020. And we're still waiting on Boeing to get Starliner, which they will. And
we're waiting.
Their problems are not insurmountable. And
they will.
And it's always good to have two domestic providers. I mean, we saw with the shuttle when we after Columbia, when the shuttle was grounded, all we had to rely on was the Soyuz. And you could have Russian officials joking about, well, maybe you should use a trampoline because we're the only game in town. That's not a good place to be, and it's better if you have redundancy in your domestic capability, and that's what we will have when Starliner flies, and that's a great thing. But so I thought that the similar redundancy and the competition, which is so effective at keeping the taxpayer from overpaying. I thought all those lessons were really baked in at NASA, and then they went and down selected to one. And it was so ironic when they down selected to only SpaceX, where it was almost like we came full circle, where all of a sudden the the trusted, sure thing contractor is now SpaceX. It was quite the turnabout there compared to where we were not that long ago with how they were looking at Boeing. So I was happy to see SpaceX be that successful, but surprised it ended up that way.
Yeah. If you were to choose a second provider, not to put you on the spot, but Dynetics or national team?
National team, for political purposes and from a industrial base considerations, I actually thought if they were going to pick one, it was going to be them. I didn't know, of course, what none of us knew was the ginormous price tag they put on that thing. But actually, in retrospect, that shouldn't have been such a surprise either, because who are they teamed up? They're teamed up with Lockheed and Northrop on that. Is that right? And I know Draper, and who else are they teamed up with? I forget.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Those are the four big ones.
Yeah, those guys aren't cheap.
The Army
and
of
I think one of the
course.
unfortunate things, and I wish it wasn't this way, but I do think that it probably has been commercial crew has probably been a very painful experience for Boeing financially. That their bottom line on that program, I'm sure, is not looking good, and they've already taken several write-offs to deal with that fact. So I think that there'll be a reluctance on the part of traditional aerospace companies to play in this firm fixed price environment, which is a shame because it is such a much better way to go, especially for as a taxpayer. It's such a much better deal for us. And we're, taking the risk off the government and onto the contractor for cost overruns and schedule delays and all that. It's wonderful for the government. But I'm afraid, and I wish so. I wish it would have worked out to Boeing's favor. But I think what you might be seeing a little bit in the failure of the national team to win that contract was a reluctance now on the part of traditional aerospace contractors like Northrop and Lockheed to play in firm fixed price without bidding a really high price to minimize their risk. And I understand it from a business perspective, but it's unfortunate. I wish they can find a way to be cost effective and compete on price with like the new space companies, if you will. And that would have been the change I wanted to see. The fact that Boeing even was willing to bid at all on a firm fixed price contract was encouraging, but I wish that it led to a real competitive bid price competitive bid from traditional aerospace companies on these contracts, and I don't think we've seen that yet.
Yeah. Now, going into kind of the motivations and the economics of that for those companies, going back to commercial crew as you brought up, again, looking at it from as an outsider, I'm looking at Boeing's position, and let's say they bring everything online and they're providing service to NASA. It's one flight a year that they get, right? It's 2 flights to the ISS per year, and it's going to be split between SpaceX and Boeing. That's not a lot.
It's not a lot, but the hope of commercial crew was that NASA wouldn't be the only customer. Right? That was the whole point. And so the other big contracting change, other than firm fixed price, was basically the ownership of the facilities and the vehicles themselves. So unlike the space shuttle, NASA doesn't own and operate the Falcon 9 and the Dragon, right? Or for that matter, Starliner and Atlas. So SpaceX, as we have, can go out and take Falcon 9 and Dragon. In fact, use exactly the same Dragon, for that matter, and the same Falcon 9, the first stage anyway, right. and fly them again and sell tickets. Rockwell couldn't do that with the space shuttle. They couldn't make or say, hey, we're going to borrow Endeavor this week and fly, and we're going to sell tickets and let's let some rich guys go up and fly around. That was not an option, but that was baked into the contract because you're right. I mean, one flight a year is it's hard to make that cost effective if you're dividing by 1 per year. But if you divide by 6 per year, it gets a lot better. And that was the hope. And SpaceX is moving down that road. And I think with hopefully some of the space station concepts that are coming up, these commercial space station concepts, there'll be demand for more than one provider to provide crew services, and it won't just be one flight a year. I mean, that's certainly the hope.
And last year we saw Inspiration 4. This year we're going to hopefully see Axiom 1. So it seems to be starting up.
We better, because I already have my ticket to go down to Florida for that one. So we better. Yeah, Axiom 1. So right now it's March 30th is the first launch opportunity, and that's coming up fast. So
yeah.
And I know those guys are very excited. They're really looking forward to launching.
So there are two retired astronauts on that, right?
Just one.
Okay.
Mike Lopez Alegría is the commander, and everybody else is making their first flight into space.
Exciting times.
The other guy that I'm very close with on the flight is Eitan Stibbe, who will be the second Israeli to fly in space, and he was a good friend of Alain Ramon, who was the first Israeli astronaut, and I got to know him very well through the Ramon Foundation and working with the family after the Columbia accident. So he's a great guy, and really the family and everybody I think involved couldn't think of a better candidate to follow in Elon's footsteps. So it's great.
That's going to be a very exciting launch for a lot of people. Although even that one has gotten some pushback from some corners of, it's again the rich guys going to space thing. It seems.
Yeah. It's Mike L.A. and three very rich guys, but one of the things that they're doing on Axiom, which I think is helping with that, is they're dedicating a lot of their personal time, which they don't have to. I mean, they can go up there and just spend the whole time looking out the window and listen to music if they want to. They're paying for it, so so a couple of things about it. I think. But what they are doing, what Eitan especially is doing, is he is completely overloaded with both science and education activities. So he's going to be spending I don't know how he's going to pull it off. He has such an ambitious list of activities to do up there, both research for basic science, and he's got people all over the world, but especially in Israel, that are putting together all these science experiments for him to do up there, and then all these educational events to inspire a whole new generation. So he's going to have a huge impact, and that's great. And I think he should be lauded for that, because again, he doesn't have to. I think people miss out on the point that these guys are buying their tickets, and they should be able to do whatever they want.
Yeah, frankly.
And if they want to just go up there and enjoy the view, that's their prerogative, and be patient. Everybody's going to have an opportunity eventually,
right?
But yeah, so and I think it's just and partly I think it's the fault of, I do blame to some extent Bezos and Branson, because with their first flights, and they're trying to drum up publicity. Sure. Get people interested. I understand what they're doing. They're marketing. They're selling a service, both on New Shepard and Virgin Galactic with Starship 2 or Spaceship 2. I understand what they're doing. They're trying to launch a business, but at the same time, I really credit Elon for the approach he took with Inspiration 4. If you watched all that, if you watched the Netflix special, if you watched all the press coverage, you didn't see Elon at all.
Right. He
was completely in the background. I guess they had one interview with him on the Netflix, and then in the first episode, but then he faded into the background. And the one picture in the media that appeared during the Inspiration 4 launch that had Elon in it, he was literally standing behind a velvet rope, on the periphery, looking in, and he made it all about them and the Inspiration 4 crew and their mission and what they were trying to do, their philanthropic mission. And all the things that they were trying to accomplish, and he took a back seat. And it was the opposite with Bezos and Branson. Wally Funk, but just because of her personality, kind of thrust herself into the forefront. She's just a force of nature. I've met her, and there's no way that cannot happen with her there. But other than that, can you name a single other person that was on the flight with Bezos or Branson?
Ooh. That's tough. I remember the faces, but I don't remember the names.
Yeah, see? And I know some of those people, so I can name them, but even an insider like yourself, probably can't. I think it'd be highly unlikely that anybody would name any of the other people on those crews,
Yeah.
despite the fact that they have very compelling stories, each and every one of them, and it could have been about them, but it wasn't, right? And so I think that focus on the billionaires
Yeah.
is fed into this whole narrative of this is just a bunch of rich guys going on joyrides, and I think that's unfortunate because I think it's kind of poisoned it to a certain extent.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get over that.
Yeah.
But then we have Dear Moon also coming up, which
another billionaire,
another high-profile billionaire. What do you think about that?
Well, it was really important to SpaceX because his support was critical for funding a lot of the Starship development, and Starship is so critical to everything that SpaceX wants to do next, and the opportunity to bring it to the masses, if you will, or at least maybe into the realm of plain old millionaires and multimillionaires, and not just billionaires, but. We'll get there, but anyway, it's so important, and so I'm grateful that he provided that support at a time where really the only thing we had as far as Starship was concerned was, some PowerPoints, and that was about it. So that was a lot of faith that was demonstrated there, and
yeah,
I think hopefully will be rewarded soon.
I was impressed. I'm hoping he has a great flight and all the people who go with him. Ambitious timeline aside, it seems, kind of funny to have Dear Moon sort of targeting the mid-20s, and at the same time we have Artemis with Starship as a lander. It almost seems like the two of those capabilities together are just a lunar orbit insertion, lunar orbit exit away from what we're trying to do with SLS and Orion plus a lander, and of course the Gateway. Seems awkward to an outsider. What's your take on that?
Well, my take, the fact that they're kind of redundant capabilities, or what specifically do you want? Are you asking?
I think just the idea of we're sending these 4 people in a capsule to rendezvous with Starship in lunar orbit and then ride the capsule back. When around the same time, SpaceX is already aiming for a different variant of Starship to be capable of going and coming back to basically lunar orbit, or at least cislunar space.
Yeah, it does seem a bit odd. I understand how we got here through the procurement process. When you're looking for a particular procurement for a particular piece of the architecture, and you evaluate it without the ability to control the whole rest of the program. Yeah. So if you're on the source board for the HLS procurement, you have a certain set of instructions. You're searching for the best possible way to get people from the Gateway down to the lunar surface. You do not have the authority to say, let's change how they get to the Gateway, or whether there's a gateway at all. Mm-hmm. We can do this a different way and change the entire Artemis architecture. You don't have the authority to do that. So you're given a very narrow. You have to wear your blinders. It would give it a very narrow task, which is find the best way to get from point A to point B.
Right.
And in that competition, given the bids and for the amount of money, it's very hard to justify spending several times over, spending taxpayer money to the tune of multiples of what one provider can do and give it to another provider. That's very hard for the government to legally do.
That makes sense.
Unless there's something vastly out of proportion with what the two providers are offering. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. The capabilities offered by Starship to get to the lunar surface exceed in terms of the number of crew it could carry, the amount of cargo it could bring. In a lot of different ways, it had additional performance, not less, and it was a much less money. So given all that, I can see how we got there. But yeah, it is a little weird. It's it's like rowing a rowboat across the Atlantic Ocean, and then when you get right outside the port, Portsmouth, England, when you get right outside when you can see it, you board an ocean liner for the last like mile. It's like it kind of I can totally understand how you would look at that and say this doesn't really make sense. But again, I understand how we got here.
Yeah. Well, I have so many more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're very busy. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. It was fun.